Hello and welcome back. I am Silvia Hartmann, the creator of Modern Energy, and I'm reading out my book, How I Escaped the Trauma Cult, and you can too if you want to. This is Chapter 9, A Matrix Build of Stars. Now I have 10,000 hours in therapy. How do you stop all that negativity? We're not doing psychology, we're doing modern energy. Breaking the trauma curse, the timeline of events, and the 8 billion prophets. Let us begin. A matrix build of stars. Right at the beginning, I said that I became aware that I was engaged in building a matrix from the ground up, following my breakthrough experiences with the invisible something that turned out to be energy, that turned out to be love. I said that I was nervous about that, uncomfortable with such a task. I had never asked to be put in a position where I would be tasked with such a thing, and what I did not want to do was to build yet another matrix that sounds great to start with, creates those early initial gains, then flattens out and turns destructive in the end. There were some components, however, which held my developing matrix in place. The first component was obviously not just the presence of love as an absolute reality, but the fact that the entire matrix was built on love in the first place. Love is the most fundamental, most powerful force in the universe. When love is present, everything changes, miracles occur. When love is absent, bad things start to happen, and this is predictable, measurable, and gets ever worse the less love there is. This is the core of my matrix, and this is what I would come back to when I got stressed, scared about the whole business of building a new matrix. Reconnecting with this essential core, which was my lived experience and personal truth, stabilized me and allowed me to go forward. I know this now. This is the truth. Now, how can I explain this to the people in my world who are completely immersed in a reality that only recognizes 5 senses and who isn't really talking about love at all any longer? Well, I could get a megaphone and start shouting in the streets or from the rooftops about love. I could hire advertising people who could make a clever marketing campaign. I could do that whole cult leader trip. That's easy enough. I watched so many people who did these things and how they developed their often extremely enthusiastic followers. But I just did not want to build that kind of matrix yet again. I wanted a better one that is much more respectable of the human spirit, but also of all the human systems, the human totality, which is beyond amazing and doesn't get the credit it deserves, nor the love. Finally, in 2019, the problems that I had with all the old cults resolved, and the way forward became clear at last. The only way to free the people and to bring them back to their own intelligence, their own power, and their own natural inherent spirituality was through their own lived experience. What was needed was to redirect their attention from the worst moments of their lives to the best moments of their lives instead. Instead of telling them how to feel or even what to think, we can simply ask people about the best moments of their lives, their star memories, and what they learned from that. This creates a completely different experience for not only the client, but the therapist as well. It creates a space where love itself can manifest, can be known, can be discussed, and absolutely will empower everyone who engages in this activity. As we have noted before, it is only once you have escaped from a destructive matrix, from the trauma cult, do you really understand just how much is lost when we operate from the wrong core principles. We had literally no idea of what extraordinary magic can be created between two people in the therapy setting when we switch from focusing on trauma to focusing on the star events, nor how this simple switch highlighted the endless shortcomings and destructive practices deemed so normal handed down in the trauma cult. Let's have a look at a few examples. 10,000 hours in therapy. A famous professor of clinical psychology said in 2024 during an interview, and I quote, "The disenfranchised need 10,000 hours in therapy, maybe more, before they feel that they are being heard and can establish real lines of communication with the therapist." My younger aspects had heard of people being in therapy for decades, 3 times a week for 45 years with the same therapist. There was a news report of such a pairing where the client died and the therapist died the week after. She could never understand how such a thing could come into being, but didn't inquire into it any further. However, during the psychology-based trauma EFT tapping time, what was happening in therapy at large began to reveal itself. Negative EFT tapping requires for the practitioner to listen to what the client is saying, and from all those words, to pick out one single statement to tap on. Depending on how well the therapist could do that, the session would become very emotional and worth the money for the client. Within a month of doing this with clients and in demonstrations every day, my aspect noticed that the clients would come into any session in quite severe stress states, -3 at the best, and vibrating with anxiety at -6 more often. And if you asked them what the problem was, they would launch into what my aspect came to think of as a flood of meaningless stress talk. Long incoherent sentences skipping from one thing to another like a printed page in all caps with no line breaks or even punctuation. This made it obviously very difficult to pick out one thing from this flood to get the trauma tapping party started. But as time went by, my aspects noted a much greater problem with all this stress talk. This problem was that the client wasn't actually telling me what their real problems were. You could say that a highly stressed person is structurally incapable of even knowing what their real problems are, and neither could they express this in words, even if they did know. The answer to the problem was to not allow the client to go into stress talk the moment they had sat down on the therapy couch, but instead to stabilize them with the heart position and bringing in a little energy first, to bring the client to at least +3 before we even ask what the problem is. This resulted in much more coherent clients. The opening statements or setups could be more easily agreed on, and as we were now dealing with real problems rather than a flood of stress grievances about literally anything that was wrong with the client's life, the sessions could be much, much more helpful. In the trauma cult, we do not have the modern energy chart, and if we did, it wouldn't have the positive wing, or even the idea that we want to move the client up and into the positives. So we, as the therapists, get to have an equal, intelligent partner in the investigation into whatever the problem may be. What we do have, thanks to the stress talk factor, is a situation of where you get your client in and just let them stress talk for 45 minutes about their current problems with the world and its wife. You can do the same thing next week, and the week after that, and the week after that, and soon enough you have your 10,000 hours in therapy. It's a perfect system to keep both clients and therapists on a hamster wheel or nicely trapped in the fish tank of insanity forever. This pattern, however, sadly is not confined to therapists and their clients in the Western world. It has become the go-to way of behaving and interacting with friends and family as well. Stress talk all the way, and nobody puts a stop to it because nobody knows that this is destructive and counterproductive in the way of social interaction. It seems normal, it seems natural in the trauma cult to start any conversation, any social media post with this stress talk that is always focused on insults, grievances, negative events, negative emotions, and negative occurrences, because that's what happens in a cult. The weirdest things seem to be normal, natural, when they're not. And it doesn't have to be this way. Armed with the modern energy chart, we can simply say that when a person is below zero, there is little point in even listening to what they have to say. Stress talk isn't worth the paper it's not written on. The problem here is that not only do people not know that stress talk is completely counterproductive, to sort for the insults all the time has created true train tracks in the brain that function like the chronic pain paths. So as time goes by, things are naturally going to become ever worse. How do you stop all that negativity? Moving people up the modern energy chart before we even begin to ask the question, what's the problem here, was only the first tentative step on the path from the darkness to the light. It is amazing to me that I didn't see it earlier, that trauma itself was the problem. I was still operating under the rules of the cult, where trauma is all and everything, and if only we could get rid of it, we would all live happily ever after. But I did not see it at the time. What I did see was that people who were using what I called energy EFT at the time, to make sure that we all know, therapists and clients alike, that we were working with energy, they weren't using it at all to its full potential. You have the modern energy chart. You have identified some kind of a trauma block for the problem. Let's say, mummy never loved me. You do the energy tapping with the client and stop every so often to ask where they are now on the modern energy chart. After a few sequences, the client says, I feel much better. +5. Yay! And the therapist would stop the session there and let them go home. Now, the thing with energy treatments is that to be complete, you need a +10 experience, a true healing event, where the client's problem has evolved, will never come back in its original form, and the client is literally dancing with joy. Yet the therapists didn't take that final step to ask, what do we need now to completely transform this? And they did not finish the sessions properly. This annoyed me so much, I decided to take the whole trauma thing away and switch to positive solutions instead. Instead of starting by stating the problem, trying to find the causative trauma, and laboriously and slowly tapping with the client on some hugely painful experience to crawl up the modern energy chart, I switched to the power of the positives and what is essentially art solutions. Don't paint the problem, paint the solution. What's the problem? My mother never loved me. What do you need to get over that? The love of God itself. We tap on the solution, and the +10 will come quickly and profoundly as we keep asking, and what else do you need? It could not be any easier if you tried. But by taking away the trauma digging, we were now structurally very much outside the cult of psychology altogether, and that was the point in 2016 at which I moved modern energy into the third field in the mind-body-spirit triad and unfolded my new matrix there instead, where it rightfully belonged. We are not doing psychology, we are doing modern energy. Now we have a serious problem. We are now dealing with a field that has neither decent theories nor decent practices. And we are dealing with the entire population who are all brainwashed to believe they only have five senses and no spirit at all. There are some people who believe in energy, but because there isn't a stable matrix, just strange constructions wonkily cobbled together from an array of incompatible ancient traditions, blatant nonsense, and all sorts of the whispers of the ages. Even these people are confused and uncertain. They often know things and feel things, but lack the ability to express themselves clearly. Of course, there are also the usual grifters, who can be found in any field of human endeavor, who lie, cheat, and steal to amass money and worldly power. And the more stressed the population becomes, the more such grifters take their chances to make their buck. People are confused, stressed, suspicious. It is extremely difficult to be heard, although the modern energy chart has helped enormously with its simple clarity and observability in lived experience. In our beginners trainings, I now like to start with the words, what is the most important part of you that has received the least amount of attention? This always causes a chuckle in the audience, but the answer, your own real living energy body, is a lovely foundation to get started. Over the years, and by focusing on the question, what makes the energy body happy, I have developed a treasure chest of techniques and base patterns that will accomplish this. It will make the energy body happier, and when that is happier, the owner of said energy body will be happier too. Cause and effect. Simple. However, if all we ever do is to chase the elusive trauma so that we can finally live happily ever after, and that is the actually wrong thing to be chasing in the first place, it doesn't matter how wonderful the techniques and methods might be we are employing. It doesn't matter if we're armed with a rock, a bow and arrow, a gun, or a lightsaber when we're chasing an illusionary monster that doesn't exist across the moors. Until and unless we stop doing that, taking a moment to breathe deeply and look around for what else there might be, nothing can change. The most important step to free ourselves from the trauma cult is to come home to the actual reality of our lives and end the trauma-centric reality divergence that is driving us all insane. Breaking the Trauma Curse, a timeline of events. In 2000, I found the guiding stars, those half-positive events that cause looping behavior as they try endlessly to complete themselves, and which are the cause for addictions, fetishes, and philias. By 2008, I had found other types of events, actual events in the energy system that cause permanent changes to that person. And I would encourage people to consider the following short meditation. Imagine a starry space, and in this space there is your lifeline from the moment of your conception to right here and now. Put all your traumas on this lifeline, little red flashing lights. This is your trauma line, and sadly, for a lot of people, that is all there is. But this isn't the whole story or the real story. Let's add some little green lights to this lifeline. And the green lights stand for all the events where something was healed, something was learned, something was understood. Let's call them healing events. As you consider this enriched lifeline now, notice that it feels a little bit better, like a relief, a tension released. Now we'll add some turquoise lights. These are for strange and mysterious events you have experienced, and we can't quite know whether they were good or bad, or even what they were. The unknowable events. Your lifeline is starting to become a little more interesting. Our next lights are purple, and those stand for the missing events, energy system events we should have had, but they never happened. And finally, let's add some bright white stars that really sparkle. Those are your star events, the best moments of our life. Now, doesn't that lifeline make a lot more sense? Do you feel a lot better considering your life was simply more and different events and not just trauma? I didn't know it then, but this was such an important step towards a more realistic overview of any person's life. The fact that people say, yes, I feel much calmer and strangely more hopeful after doing this meditation, perhaps even a little excited, told me then that I was on the right track with the idea that we have to reduce the trauma obsession before we can make any progress. This was all good and well, but still, it was not enough to break the vast majority out of that appalling prison of the trauma cult. I didn't give up. I kept working with the power of the positives, the power of love itself, especially during the global panic pandemic, to keep our spirits up and find ways to take us higher. The problem how to make a person feel better through modern energy techniques had been solved decades ago. The new mission was to try and find a way to raise the energy average permanently so that we wouldn't constantly having to be applying techniques and methods to rescue ourselves from the negative stress states, but instead could get on with living our lives and having fun instead. The energy average is hugely important in the greater scheme of things. The living energy body has a self-healing function, which is disabled below zero. How effective this self-healing can be is determined by how often this self-healing function has the energy to do some self-healing. And this is the connection between time and healing. In essence, the higher a person's energy average, the quicker time will heal whatever energy problem they have accumulated in the past. In other words, when you are reasonably energy high, your past traumas will be automatically healed, and you don't have to apply any methods to make that happen. Not only that, your energy problems will be healed in the correct order and sequence, and that includes healing repressed trauma we didn't even know we had. We don't have to dig for it. We don't need hypnosis to find it. It will be healed by the energy body itself if we give it the resources to do its natural job, the job it was designed to do in the first place. The self-healing energy body demands that we raise our energy average, and how to do that was my big next research project from 2010 onwards. And finally, quarter of a century after starting on this epic mission to bring love back into the world of thinking modern human beings, it happened. I understood how we can do it, how we can deprogram the victims of the trauma cult without dragging them straight into the next destructive matrix. And if you think about it, and of course I do, and I've done non-stop for decades, it is the sheer obviousness of the great discovery that is so telling. $8 billion profits. If we look across the history of humanity, as well as how things are right now, right here, we will notice that there are some people who become cult leaders. They have an idea, the idea is popular, and they amass their followers. The followers can be whipped up into all manner of strange activities, destructive, counterproductive, loveless modes of being and doing, and all manner of personal and societal madness ensues. There is a scene in a humorous movie where the cult leader stands in a high place and shouts at their followers, "I want you to think for yourselves." The assembled crowd shouts back, "We think for ourselves." The way all these cult matrices in the past operated was not what I wanted. Born in Germany after the Second World War, The idea of having endless blocks of ant people repeating my words and shouting my name wasn't ever where I wanted to be. There is, however, a different way. When very high energy individuals come together, a different kind of group emerges. This has been described as a mastermind group. These are individuals who know who they are, have a strong sense of self, and do not dissolve when their energy system aligns with each other. Rather, what happens here is that they begin to experience a form of expanded thinking, where each one becomes more than the sum of their parts. However, for this to be even possible, the individuals entering into this extraordinary yet entirely human experience must be stable within themselves and very energy high. What we need to make significant changes for humanity is to have these energy high groups of people work on whatever problems they're attempting to solve. Instead of a single prophet here and there leading their little flocks of sheep, we need 8 billion prophets all at the same time, everywhere on Earth. Now, with the modern energy chart and all the many assembled techniques to raise energy, we were closer to this idea of a more stable, more energy high people working together for the good of humanity, which in and of itself is a meaningful goal to work towards. As I was contemplating these things and trying to figure out how we could possibly get there, when everyone is so stressed, everyone is so traumatized, everyone is such an emotional mess, thinks of themselves as eternal victims to all manner of invisible and malignant forces that are entirely out of their control, I still did not consciously realize that I was myself still trapped inside the trauma cult. And of course, if you think that the people of planet Earth are like that, there is no possible solution to the endless problems of humanity. Yet along, and all at the same time, I could see the light within. I did know that people were not what they thought they were, not at all. But I didn't know how I could show that to them, or tell them, or even if I did, of course they wouldn't believe me. After all I'd seen, experienced, and been through, I was still nervous to even start a research project on the high positive memories, Project 11 in 2019. I sold it to the participants by saying, let's take a trauma holiday. Let's take a holiday from all that endless healing that we all think we need. We've been doing that for such a long time now. Let's just do something different for a change. Of course, I knew that interacting with high positive memories, the star events, would be fun. I knew it would raise energy. I knew we would discover some wonderful things that we would never ever discover by working with more injuries and more trauma. But I admit, absolutely, that I had no idea at all of the power of our own star memories to take us finally out of the trauma cult, to free us from the fish tank of insanity for good, and show us the way to a radically new and different way, not only for therapy and healing, but how to deal with life itself. It was in the engagement with my own star memories that I finally escaped the trauma cult. It was when I realized that I was not the broken, beaten, traumatized, neglected, poor, victim child that I had believed myself to be my whole life long. That I was the blessed child instead. I had assembled so much evidence over the course of a year and a half of working with my own star memories that I was no longer a victim, and I was finally freed from the trauma cult. And you can be too, if you want to.